When 6-year-old Lisa Marie Presley watched 16-year-old Michael Jackson moonwalk across the stage in 1974, she had no idea she was witnessing a moment that would connect two of music's greatest legends forever. 20 years later, she would marry that same moonwalking boy, becoming the bridge between two kingdoms, Graceland and Neverland. But what she discovered about the terrifying parallels between her father Elvis and her husband Michael would haunt her for the rest of her life. The year was 1974, and Elvis Presley was still the undisputed king of rock and roll, commanding sold-out shows in Las Vegas while the Jackson 5 were the hottest young act in America. When little Lisa Marie accompanied her father to see the Jackson 5 perform at the Sahara Tahoe in Nevada, she was mesmerized by one performer in particular. She was particularly fascinated by lead singer Michael Jackson and his dancing talent, witnesses recalled. The 6-year-old girl couldn't take her eyes off the 16-year-old boy who moved like magic across the stage, spinning and gliding in ways that seemed to defy gravity itself. But this wasn't just any childhood crush. It was the first thread in a tapestry of destiny that would bind the Presley and Jackson legacies together in ways no one could have predicted. Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson never met face to face, but their lives followed such eerily similar paths that it seemed as if they were living the same story in different decades. Both discovered as children, both thrust into global superstardom before they could understand what it meant, both isolated by fame from normal human connection, both ultimately destroyed by the very forces that had made them legends. Michael Jackson was born into musical royalty when the Jackson 5 became Motown's biggest sensation in 1970. At just 11 years old, he was already performing for millions, his childhood sacrificed on the altar of entertainment. Elvis had walked that exact same path 2 decades earlier, discovered at 19 and transformed from a shy Mississippi boy into the most famous person on earth by age 21. Both of them had the luxury of creating whatever reality around them they wanted to create. Lisa Marie would later observe about her father and future husband. They would have the kinds of people who were going to go with their program, and if they weren't, then they could be disposed of. This power to control their environment became both a blessing and a curse for both men. It allowed them to create musical magic, but it also insulated them from the real world until reality became whatever they wanted it to be, even when that reality was dangerous. The parallels were uncanny and would only become more obvious as time went on. Both Elvis and Michael were deeply religious, Elvis as a lifelong Christian and Michael as a Jehovah's Witness. Both were mama's boys who adored their mothers and struggled with their father's expectations. Both were incredibly generous, giving away cars, houses, and money to strangers. Both loved animals and collected exotic pets. But perhaps most significantly, both became prisoners of their own fame, retreating to their respective kingdoms. Elvis to Graceland in Memphis, Michael to Neverland Ranch in California, where they could control every aspect of their environment. The isolation took its toll on both men in remarkably similar ways. They became nocturnal creatures, sleeping during the day and coming alive at night. They surrounded themselves with yes men and enablers. They lost touch with normal human relationships. And most dangerously, they both turned to prescription medications to manage the psychological pain of their unusual lives. By the mid-1970s, Elvis was already showing signs of the decline that would ultimately kill him. His weight fluctuated wildly, his performances became erratic, and his dependence on prescription drugs was spiraling out of control. He was only 42 years old, but he looked and acted like a much older man. Michael Jackson, meanwhile, was just entering his peak years as a solo artist. Off the Wall in 1979 and Thriller in 1982 would make him the biggest star on the planet. But even as his career soared, those who knew him noticed troubling signs that echoed Elvis's trajectory. The pressure of being the most famous person in the world was taking the same toll on Michael that it had taken on Elvis. He became increasingly reclusive, trusting fewer and fewer people. He began to rely on prescription medications for everything from sleep to pain management to anxiety. Most tellingly, he started to lose his grip on reality, surrounding himself with people who would tell him only what he wanted to hear. When Elvis Presley died on August 16, 1977, at the age of 42, the official cause was cardiac arrhythmia, But everyone knew the real culprit was years of prescription drug abuse. Michael Jackson, then 19 years old and on the verge of solo superstardom, was deeply affected by Elvis's death. Michael always had a fascination with Elvis, friends remembered. He studied everything about him: his music, his movies, his style, his career trajectory. But he was also terrified by how Elvis's story ended. That fascination would lead Michael to make one of the most significant decisions of his personal life: pursuing a relationship with Elvis's daughter, Lisa Marie Presley. After that childhood encounter in 1974, Lisa Marie and Michael didn't cross paths again until 1992, when they were reintroduced at a dinner party in Los Angeles. Lisa Marie was 24, recently separated from her first husband, Danny Kyo, and trying to establish her own identity in the music industry. Michael was 34, the biggest star in the world, but increasingly isolated and struggling with the pressures of fame. The connection was immediate and profound. Here were two people who had grown up in the strangest circumstances imaginable. Both children of musical royalty, both scarred by early fame, both struggling to find authentic relationships in a world where everyone wanted something from them. They instantly connected because they understood each other's massive fame, those close to them observed. These were two people who couldn't go anywhere without being mobbed, who couldn't have normal relationships because everyone had ulterior motives. Michael began pursuing Lisa Marie with a combination of genuine affection and what seemed like a deeper psychological need. Friends noticed that he was fascinated not just with Lisa Marie herself, but with her connection to Elvis. Through her, he could somehow touch the legacy of the man whose path he was following so closely. Michael said, "I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm completely in love with you. I want us to get married and for you to have my children," Lisa Marie would later recall of his proposal. But their relationship was complicated by Michael's growing recognition of the eerie parallels between his life and Elvis's. The more time he spent with Lisa Marie, the more he saw himself reflected in her father's story, and the more terrified he became of Elvis's fate. This fear came to a head during one particularly haunting conversation at Neverland Ranch. Lisa Marie and Michael were sitting in his library by the fireplace when he said something that would stay with her forever. "We were sitting by the fire, and he was telling me that he was afraid he was going to end up like my father," Lisa Marie remembered. "He was always asking me about when he died, how it happened, when it happened, and where. He said, 'I feel like I'm going to end up the same way.'" The conversation chilled Lisa Marie to the bone. Here was the most famous man in the world, married to the daughter of another king, confessing his terror that he was doomed to repeat her father's tragic trajectory. Michael's fears weren't unfounded. By the 1990s, the parallels between his life and Elvis's were becoming impossible to ignore. Like Elvis, Michael had become increasingly isolated, spending most of his time at his private estate surrounded by employees and hangers-on. Like Elvis, he was struggling with prescription drug dependency that had started with legitimate medical issues, but had spiraled into something much more dangerous. The prescription drugs were perhaps the most ominous parallel. Elvis had started taking pills to help him sleep, to give him energy for performances, to manage pain from various injuries. What began as medical treatment gradually became a crutch for managing the psychological pain of his isolated existence. Michael's drug use followed an almost identical pattern. It began with legitimate medical needs: pain management after the 1984 Pepsi commercial accident that severely burned his scalp, sleeping aids to help him rest between grueling tour schedules. But gradually, the medications became a way to escape from the pressure and loneliness of being Michael Jackson. Lisa Marie, who had watched her father's decline firsthand, recognized the warning signs immediately. "I had to make the decision to walk because I saw the drugs, and doctors were coming in, and they scared me. And that put me back into what I went through with my father. And that ended it," she later explained. The marriage between Michael Jackson and Lisa Marie Presley lasted only 20 months, but it represented something much deeper than a celebrity romance. It was the intersection of two tragic royal legacies, a moment when the daughter of one king tried desperately to save another king from following her father's path to destruction. "He had to make a decision," Lisa Marie said about the end of their marriage. "Was it the drugs and the vampires or me? And he pushed me away." The vampires she referred to were the sycophants and enablers who surrounded Michael, just as they had surrounded Elvis. people who profited from the star's fame and had no incentive to help him get healthy. After their divorce, Lisa Marie and Michael continued to have contact on and off for years. She watched from a distance as his behavior became increasingly erratic, as his appearance changed dramatically, as his legal troubles mounted. It must have been like watching her father's story play out all over again, but in slow motion. The final, most chilling parallel came on June 25th, 2009, when Michael Jackson died at the age of 50 from cardiac arrest caused by a lethal combination of prescription drugs. Essentially the same cause of death that had claimed Elvis 32 years earlier. Lisa Marie was in England when she learned of Michael's death. Remarkably, she had spent the entire day crying for no apparent reason, feeling an overwhelming sadness she couldn't explain. When the news came that evening, the pieces fell into place. "I was literally cutting my food, eating my dinner, crying," she recalled. "I was floored. Honestly floored." But perhaps the most eerie detail was the location of Michael's death. He died in a rented mansion in Holmby Hills, Los Angeles, directly across the street from a house that Elvis had once owned, a place where Lisa Marie had spent time as a child. The symbolism was almost too perfect to be coincidental. The king of pop had died within sight of a former home of the king of rock and roll, completing a circle that had begun 35 years earlier when a 6-year-old girl watched a 16-year-old boy dance across a Las Vegas stage. Looking back at the intertwined destinies of Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson, the parallels are so numerous and specific that they seem almost supernatural. Both were discovered as children and thrust into global fame before they could develop normal coping mechanisms. Both became the most famous people in their respective eras. Both were incredibly talented performers who revolutionized popular music. Both were generous to a fault, giving away fortunes to friends and strangers. Both became increasingly isolated as their fame grew, retreating to elaborate private estates where they could control their environment. Both struggled with the psychological pressure of being constantly watched and judged. Both developed dependencies on prescription medications as a way to manage the pain of their unusual lives. Both died young, Elvis at 42, Michael at 50, from causes directly related to prescription drug abuse. Both left behind complicated legacies, remembered as much for their tragic endings as for their incredible artistic achievements. And both were connected through Lisa Marie Presley, the only person who knew them both intimately, who watched both of their declines, who tried unsuccessfully to save the second king after losing the first. The parallels between the lives of her father and former husband are astounding, even to Lisa Marie, observers noted. The burden of witnessing both tragedies, of being the bridge between two royal houses that both ended in pharmaceutical tragedy, was almost too much for one person to bear. In her posthumously published memoir, Lisa Marie revealed just how deeply Michael's fears about following Elvis's path had affected their relationship. "He was always asking me about when he died, how it happened, when it happened, and where," she wrote. The questions weren't casual curiosity. They were the desperate inquiries of a man who could see his own fate reflected in his father-in-law's story. The tragedy is that Michael's fears were entirely justified. Despite being warned by Elvis's example, despite having Lisa Marie's firsthand knowledge of where that path led, despite having every resource available to get help, Michael Jackson followed Elvis Presley's trajectory almost step by step. The story of Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson isn't just about two individual tragedies. It's about the systematic way that the entertainment industry creates and destroys its biggest stars. Both men were products of a system that values talent and profit above human well-being, that encourages isolation and dependency, that surrounds vulnerable people with enablers rather than genuine support. Lisa Marie Presley, who loved both men and lost both men to the same forces, understood this better than anyone. They both had the luxury of creating whatever reality around them they wanted to create, she observed, but that luxury became a prison. The saddest part of the Elvis-Michael connection is how preventable Michael's tragedy should have been. He had Elvis's example as a warning. He had Lisa Marie's lived experience as a guide. He had unlimited resources and access to the best medical care in the world. Yet he still ended up following the same path to the same destination. Perhaps that's because the forces that destroyed both Elvis and Michael, the isolation of fame, The pressure of being the most watched person in the world, the temptation of pharmaceutical escape from psychological pain are simply too powerful for any individual to resist alone. Or perhaps it's because both men were so deeply traumatized by their childhoods in the spotlight that they never developed the emotional tools necessary to cope with adult life. They remained in many ways children playing dress-up as kings, never quite equipped for the responsibilities and pressures that came with their crowns. The legacy of Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson will always be their music, the incredible joy and artistry they brought to millions of people around the world. But their personal stories serve as a cautionary tale about the true cost of fame and the deadly combination of isolation, pressure, and pharmaceutical dependency. Lisa Marie Presley, who inherited the trauma of both legacies, spent the rest of her life trying to make sense of why two of the most talented, generous, beloved people she knew had to die the same way. In many interviews, she spoke about the eerie similarities between her father and her ex-husband, always with a sense of wonder and sadness that fate could be so cruelly repetitive. When Lisa Marie herself died in January of 2023, at the age of 54, also from complications related to prescription medications, it completed one of the most tragic family sagas in entertainment history. Three generations of the Presley family had been touched by the deadly combination of fame and pharmaceutical dependency. But perhaps the most important lesson from the Elvis-Michael connection isn't about the dangers of fame or drugs. It's about the importance of genuine human connection. Both men were surrounded by thousands of people but died alone, isolated by their fame from the authentic relationships that might have saved them. Their story reminds us that behind every crown is a human being, vulnerable and flawed, and in need of love and support. The tragedy of Elvis Presley and Michael Jackson isn't just that they died young. It's that they lived most of their lives unable to experience the simple human connections that make life worth living. The little girl who watched Michael Jackson dance in 1974 grew up to marry him, and in doing so, she became the witness to one of fate's cruelest repetitions. Through Lisa Marie's eyes, we see how two kings, separated by a generation but connected by destiny, followed the same path from childhood stardom to tragic endings. Their stories are forever intertwined, two chapters in the same cautionary tale about the price of fame and the power of forces larger than any individual talent or fortune. They remind us that even kings are mortal, and that all the money and fame in the world can't protect someone from the consequences of a broken system and a broken heart. If this incredible story of fate, fame, and tragic parallels moved you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and notification bell for more untold stories about music's greatest legends. What do you think about the eerie connections between Elvis and Michael? Do you believe some people are destined to follow similar paths? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you know someone who's fascinated by music history and the price of fame, share this video with them. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you were amazed by these chilling parallels. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time for another incredible story proving that sometimes truth really is stranger than fiction.